Good morning. Anybody else having a hard time this morning? Struggling? Well, you might have been before you came and were uplifted by this wonderful song service. Thank you, Jeremiah, for leading our hearts and minds to the throne. Thank you for those who have also led in worship up to this point. It is a beautiful morning. It's wonderful to be here. And hopefully I'm going to not lessen, I'm going to greaten your experience as we continue moving forward. We're just in the dad joke mode this morning since Bible class and teaching parenting class downstairs and trying to set the tone for the dads here. So we have to embrace all of that if we're going to be good dads like the men, at least in the examples that are being upheld that we're going to be talking about this morning. We have some dads who did some things that weren't so great in their lives, but there are three things that they did at the end of their lives, or rather, each of them did something at the end of their life that God upholds and wants us to think about. Faith in our view of the future. Hebrews chapter 11, as we continue our reflection upon this text, we're going to be thinking about verses 20 through 22. We are indeed standing upon the rock that is Jesus. We are standing upon also God's promises. And sometimes we sing songs that call us to reflect upon our security, our position when we think about who we are as Christians. Now, we know that as Romans chapter 8, verse 24 says, we're saved in hope, but the hope that is seen is not hope. And so there are things that we have now as Christians, but there are many more things that we look forward to in the future, promises that we hope one day to enjoy. What does that look like to stand on the promises of God, given that, again, the hope that we are saved in is what we have not yet seen? Well, I channeled my inner Mike Mitchell and turned to Google Images and tried to visualize that. Are we standing on nothing? That really is the kind of way that it should be, that even though there is not a reality that we are standing on, we are standing upon that as though it were real. But sadly, and too often, it is the case that instead of really standing on the promises of God that are not yet realized, we are falling and kind of clinging for dear life on nothing. There are plenty of people who live the life of faith hoping that when they pull that cord one day that the parachute's going to open. And I remember growing up, one of the tracts that we had was something like spiritual life insurance, right? This idea that the plan of salvation was spiritual life insurance. Obviously, there is a sense in which we are preparing for the future, but there's a sense in which we need to embrace and understand that reality now and treat it as though it is real. Because for the patriarchs, the promises of God portrayed a future that was realer than any reality. When they thought about what God was going to give them, it was as concrete and solid as any other thing. On Christ, the solid rock, I stand, or do I, is what we're going to think about as we think about the way that these three men viewed the promises of God. So three views of the future. This lesson is going to break down very simply. We're going to think about the three different views that we see of the future in these three men, and then we're just going to think about some lessons for us. And so let's turn again to the text in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 20. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. Probably the most detailed of these accounts is the one surrounding Isaac, and that's where we will begin. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. Now, fill in the blank for me here. Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. Now, my wife doesn't let me sing that song, and I kind of get her point to a degree because I'm not sure what the right hand or the left hand or the right foot or the left foot has to do with any of that. But the fact is that the father Abraham, he has many sons, or does he? In the biblical text, he has how many? One son, right? Now, we understand that we are the children of Abraham by faith. Galatians chapter 3 talks about that, but the text actually emphasizes, as we talked about a couple weeks back, the text emphasizes that Isaac was Abraham's only son. So what do you think, being that there was so much emphasis placed upon Isaac, what do you think as we think about growing up in the household of Abraham? What did Isaac grow up hearing from Father Abraham? What did Abraham talk about? What did he emphasize? Well, I think one of the things that he must have emphasized is the way that his journey with God began and how Abraham was responding to a promise. Dad, why do we live in tents when all the other people here in the land of Canaan live in houses? Why are we, moving from place to place and living in a way that's different than all the people that we see here? Well, son, a long time ago, God made this promise to me. God said to me, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Abraham believed that, and he taught that to his son because Isaac was his only son, and because he was the son of promise, God's promise was going to come to him. And I think Isaac really embraced that. You see, we're going to be looking at Genesis 27. You can go ahead and open your Bibles there, but I want to highlight from the beginning something that comes up in this text as Isaac is doing what the text calls us to think about. As he is blessing his son, Jacob, listen to what he says, and listen to how similar it is to what Abraham was told by God. In Genesis chapter 27, verse 29, let peoples serve you and let nations bow down to you. This is him telling his son what's going to be the blessing of his future. Be master over your brethren and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you and blessed be those who bless you. Doesn't that sound a lot like what God told Abraham? And so realize that Isaac believed what God had told Abraham. Now, he believed that, having not yet, of course, received it himself. Through the life of Abraham, he received nothing in terms of the promises that God was going to give him, save that one son, the promise in terms of the land and the nation and all of those things. Isaac believed that promise, and even though he also did not receive the nation and land, in fact, didn't do much better. Dad had one son, Isaac has two sons. He believed, though, something very important about the promises of God. He believed that it was something that could be handed down as an inheritance to his son. But the text says that by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. But let's actually think a little bit about what happened. So again, we're in Genesis 27, and I'm going to be overviewing the text rather than simply reading it to you. But again, Isaac had two sons, and they were two very different young men. Esau was the Alaskan man, right? He was the man who liked to go out there and go on the hunting trips. He liked to catch wild game, and he was a man after Isaac's heart. Isaac liked that kind of thing as well. But Jacob was a different kind of guy. He wasn't any less strong or manly. In fact, it's interesting when you think about how much a stone weighed that would cover a well in those days. Jacob just walks over to that thing, and the lady that's taken his fancy needs some water, and he actually lifts that thing up and chucks it off to the side. He's not a small fella, Jacob, but at the same time, not really so much into all the hunting stuff. The text says that he was a person who dwelled by the tents, and so a very different kind of guy, and a guy that unfortunately, in this family, as so many of the families of the Old Testament were, that's somewhat fractured. You have Esau, the favorite son of Isaac. You have Jacob, the favorite son of Rebekah. Now, Esau, when Isaac is getting very old, because Esau is the favorite son, it's every intention in Isaac's heart that he's going to receive the blessing of God. He's going to take this thing that Abraham was given, this promise, mind you, this promise that was given to him, and he's going to pass it down to Esau. But if you know the story, you know how instead of that actually happening, Rebekah leads Jacob to play a trick on Isaac. Isaac's eyesight is not very good, and really is captivated by good food, evidently, because I don't care if you put some hair upon one of my boys that's somewhat like the hair of the other child, I'm not going to get confused in the voices of the two of them, which one is which. But never mind all of that. What actually happens is Jacob goes, and before Esau can return with some wild game, game. He brings sort of a goat stew, which a goat has kind of a gamey type flavor, to his dad and pretends to be Esau so that he can get the blessing from Isaac. Now that's where we're going to pick up in Genesis 27 with this blessing that, again, the text is calling us to in Hebrews 11. Genesis 27 and verse number 29. Genesis 27 and verse number 29. And it reads, let's see, I should start 27, I'm sorry. Genesis 27, verse 27, sorry. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his clothing and blessed him and said, surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore, all right, this is the blessing. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you. Let nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren. Let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. So there's the blessing. But remember, when the Hebrews author calls attention to this event, he says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. Now, again, the intention wasn't what it ought to have been. Again, that Isaac was going to be blessing just the one son, Esau, even though that intention has been supplanted, which also in of itself is not very good. There's something to be reflected upon about what happens next, about the whole event and the blessing of two sons. So what happens when Esau returns with the wild game that his father craved and expects to receive a blessing from his father? In verse number 30, let's keep reading. Now it happened as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau's brother came in from hunting. He also had made savory food and brought it to his father and said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me. And his father Isaac said to him, who are you? We just had an Esau in here. Who are you? Esau says, I am your son, your firstborn, Esau. Then Isaac trembled exceedingly. Why? All he had done was say some words to Jacob. So what's the big deal? You said some words to Jacob. Why don't you just say some words to Esau? You said something to the one kid, say something to the other kid. What does it matter? We're not dealing with, it's not like, we have this family heirloom or something that has been handed down through the generations and it's priceless and we gave it to the wrong kid or wait, is it? As you keep reading here, you're going to see the way that Isaac viewed what his blessing or what his promise from the Lord was. Isaac trembled exceedingly and said, who? Where is the one who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed. When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceeding great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me also, O my father. But he said, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing. These weren't just words. This was the concrete promise of God. This was what Abraham was told and what Isaac grew up hearing. And Isaac says, I gave that to Jacob, and I can't give it to you because I've already given it away. Esau is reflecting upon this event, or rather, Isaac says, your brother came with a seed and has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly called Jacob, supplanter, trickster? For he has supplanted me these two times. He took away my birthright, now he's taken away my blessing. Haven't you reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac, it's not just words. He's having to search through his mind. Is there anything I didn't say? Anything that I didn't give away already? Because as he thinks about the blessing of God, it's real. And so he says, indeed, I have made him your master, and all his brethren I have given to him as servants. With grain and wine I have sustained him. What shall I do now for you, my son? And even though, like I said, maybe the intention isn't good, and maybe the tricking isn't good, and the lying isn't, all the little details of this story aren't that great, what we see in Isaac at this moment really is. Because as he thought about the promises of God, like any possession, once a blessing was given, it was gone. Because what was it to him? It was real. It was realer than real. It was realer than any other possession that he had. Let's think about another time when someone looked into the future. By faith, Jacob now, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff. So years later, this is after Jacob has had a large family. His family has migrated down to Egypt because of a famine. There's a lot that could be said about all of that, but we're going to fast forward to the end of his life in Genesis chapter 48, when now Jacob is reunited with his son Joseph, who himself now has two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Now that's the way that we often think of them, although it really should be Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh is the older son, and as is the custom in these days, the older son is to be thought of in primary terms, and the other sons are secondary to that firstborn son. We can see the importance of the firstborn child, the firstborn son, in just a few chapters later in the book of Exodus, right? And in the plague that strikes down the firstborn. But Genesis chapter 48, beginning in verse number 12, old man Jacob calls these two grandsons in. In verse number 12, Joseph, it says, brought them from beside his knees, and he bowed down with his face to the earth in respect to his father. Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. Then Israel, by the way, is Jacob. If you're not sure about that or didn't know that, God actually gives him that name, and there's significance to that, which I won't explore at this time. But Israel is Jacob, so Jacob stretched out his right hand and laid it not on Manasseh, as maybe Joseph expected, but on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hands knowingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. He blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has fed me all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. Let my name be named upon them, in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Now when Joseph saw at this point, his father had laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. He took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. That's the way all this is supposed to play out, the way all this is supposed to work. But the father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. How clear is the future in the mind of this man? And why does he see it playing out like this, and perhaps even want it to do so? He's in tune with God. He knows God at this point. He's lived in faith and transformed his character at this point. And he's seen the way that God works. He has seen over and over again how God works contrary to conventions, and how it was so often that God would choose the lesser above the greater, that he would choose the younger above the older. He knows that that was the story that he himself had experienced, how God had chosen him instead of choosing Esau, the firstborn. And so in like manner, in following the example of his God, which in of itself is a great lesson that we could explore, in like manner, he chooses to bless the younger instead of the older. But where I really see something profound about this worshipful blessing that he gives these two young boys is in the words that follow. So he blessed them that day, saying, by you Israel will bless, saying, may God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh. And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And that's again the way that we so often say it, Ephraim and Manasseh. But then Israel said to Joseph, behold, I am dying, but God will be with you. He will bring you back to the land of your fathers. And moreover, I have given to you one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. If you read Genesis before, is that ringing any bells for you? You can be forgiven if this is all new to you, but let me make a long story short in terms of our communal reflection upon this text here, that there actually is no account of that happening at all. There's no account of Joseph going and with his sword and with his bow driving out the Amorites. And in fact, a lot of statements to the contrary. There are statements where God says that the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. They don't deserve to be driven out of this land, and that's why you can't take it at this point. God is waiting for the time when those people deserve their judgment to deliver upon his promises to his people. And so what's going on here? Well, there are people who look at this and they say, well, it must have happened. Maybe the Bible doesn't record it. That's not the way the Bible teaches us. What is here purposefully. What is not purposefully. And so the fact that there is no record of this happening is a strong indication that it hasn't. And furthermore, that again, as the Hebrews author is getting us to think about, that there's something really, really special here. Because Abraham and Isaac and Jacob knew something about the promises of God. They knew that this land wasn't going to be theirs at this time, but they knew it was going to be theirs in the future. And when the forefathers thought about the promises of God, they realized something about that what was needed to accomplish would, without any doubt, be provided in order that it would be accomplished. All right, so whatever is needed, whatever it takes and I should say, without any doubt be provided. I'm using the word accomplished twice. But it's going to be provided. And so as Jacob looks at the future, he says, speaking as so often the Bible also speaks about what I do through others, I do. He says that the descendants that come from me are going to drive these people out, and you're going to have land, and you're going to have twice as much as you do. And he sees that as clear as any other thing that we see with our two eyes. It was real to him. In fact, what other people who look at this and see the beauty of it note is something that you see throughout the Old Testament. That whether it's God, so often it's found in God's speech, but it also occasionally is found in people's speech too. That God will speak of the future and use the past tense. You ever notice that? You'll be reading in something and God will say something's going to happen, but it's like it already happened if the translation honors that. And it's like, well, that hasn't happened yet. You know your timeline. You know that doesn't mesh up. That hasn't happened yet. But again, when God says something is going to happen, it will happen. And whatever it takes for it to happen will also happen. And number 3 is another view of the future through Joseph. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22, by faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. Turn over a couple of chapters to chapter 50 and verse 24. And at the end of this account, obviously, Joseph now has gotten to be old. He says to his brethren in verse 24, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Now, Joseph, as you're thinking about what's so profound about this, he made his family swear about a future that he knew was real. He knew that the Israelites were not going to stay in Egypt, even though in his entire life, mostly, his entire adult life, really, all of his family rearing years and his retirement, as we would call it, he's been in Egypt, and everybody's been in Egypt. But he says, we're not going to stay here. God's going to bring us out of this place. That is going to happen, and you have to swear to me. And this has to be passed down through people. I don't want a future, and I believe that the forefathers, I know Job saw the resurrection. I believe they knew something about that, even though there wasn't necessarily, XYZ that led them to that conclusion. We see it in Abraham, right, as he thinks about Isaac. And so he says, I don't want to be here. I want to be there. And I think about some thoughts. I'd love to explore this thought further, but I'll say this about our view of the future. I know so many men want to prepare their sons for the revolution. It's coming. The government's getting worse and worse. Times are getting bad. The world is getting worse. You've got to be ready for that world and how bad it's going to be. Revolution is coming. We prepare our kids for the revolution without preparing them for the resurrection. We don't think about the real future and the hopeful confidence that every Christian has as it relates to that future. It'll work out. That's what you see in Isaac, in Jacob, in Joseph. It's going to work out. There might be temptations and difficulties. There might be some Amorites that need to be driven out along the way, but it's going to work out, right? We need to be convinced of that. So let's think about some lessons for us as we do draw the main thoughts from this text. Number one, our view of the future shapes the future. Because do you think that Isaac and that Jacob and that Joseph would have been so convinced of the promises of God if Abraham hadn't have been? Do you think that it would have been real to Isaac and to Jacob and to Joseph if it wasn't real to Abraham? And that speaks a lot about the potential. You know, we think about how bad the world is. I've had people flat out tell me, I wouldn't have kids right now. Why do you think that this is a failing and failed enterprise? Why do you think that it has to turn out like that? You know, God has not changed the original mandate to be fruitful and multiply. It's still there, and there are still great blessings in having children. So why do you think it has to be as negative as it seems? Why can't instead we embrace the positive future, the positive reality that God has, and then work in our small corner of the world to see that that is what bears out? Our view of the future shapes the future. And if we are not standing upon the promises, our children will see it. And you guarantee that, again, as we've said before, say again, if we're not standing upon the promises, they won't be sitting upon the premises. They're not going to stay. If they don't see that it's real in you, they're not going to be here later. So again, our view of the future shapes the future. Number two, if we understand God's promises correctly, we view them as being real. Real. Something that you can hold and touch. Something that when you pass it along, it is passed along. And you don't have it anymore. That's how they thought of the blessings of God. And we need to think about them that way too. If God's blessings, if his promises are real, number three, then anything they might require is as good as done. Jacob knows that for Ephraim and Manasseh to have the land, he's been through the land of Canaan. He's walked its length and breadth. He knows exactly what it's like. He knows who's there. And he says, if you guys are going to have this land, the Amorites are going to have to be gone from it. But that's going to happen. He doesn't have to worry about the details. He imagines swords and bows. Sometimes guys like to imagine the details, but it's going to happen. There's not going to be any doubt about that. And there isn't or shouldn't be any doubt in our minds about anything that might be required for God's promises to be borne out. So stop worrying about it like it's your problem to fix sometimes. And realize that it is as good as done if God has promised it. Number four, the reality of God's promises ought to prompt my planning and foresight. I love the way that Joseph looked at the future because he saw a future where God's promises were delivered. What do I see in my future? There's so many things that we could think about along these lines, practically speaking, but I would love it if, again, as we thought about a future where God's promises are going to be realized, that our children saw us striving to the utmost to deliver that in our lifetime. I've seen the bumper sticker before, being of sound mind, I spent it all. I hate the bumper sticker, to be honest. I really hate it because again, what is that? I mean, it's just, like as they're preparing for the future, they're preparing for a future where, you get to the point and you just spend it all because there's nothing after and nothing to look forward to. And no, that's not really how fathers and grandparents should be looking at the future and preparing their families and souls for the future. So focus your efforts and focus what you do and what you give and what you have upon the reality of what Jesus is going to do someday. He's going to return. The dead in Christ will rise. What needs to happen between now and then? And what needs to be given to achieve that? We need to have faith as we view the future. We see wonderful and amazing faith in these three men. And remember, they lived so long ago, and they had so little to base that faith upon. We have seen time and time again God prove himself, God deliver upon his promises. And so again, what God has said in Jesus is real, and the world is going to do what the world does. But at the end of this walk is heaven. And the reality of that should undergird every step that we take. Are there any problems that you have this morning? Any way that you need help? Any way that we can pray for you? Let us know. You'll have an opportunity to do that while we stand and sing this song of invitation.